I'm trying to convince you to like or to embrace uncertainty, even though it sounds like, why? You know, we always want certainty. So certainty, order, it's all good. It gives us comfort. It gives us control. It gives us the illusion of we have power, we can manipulate, we understand things, right? So it goes all the way back to Descartes. He's one of the most influential thinkers, at least in Western philosophy and science, that really strived to have absolute certainty, to have really foundations, unshakable foundations for knowledge that could serve as a grounds for philosophy and the sciences. So through he's famous for his cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, and there are a variation of all sorts of puns, like I drink, therefore I am, and it goes on. So his idea was that there are so many things you can doubt. We are facing uncertainty in everyday lives, in our thinking, but in order to have a really good, sound science and philosophy, we need to get rid of everything that we are uncertain of. And then when we have that, absolute certain ground, then we can build our foundations from there on. So through his meditation, one of the most influential book, he eliminated bit by bit all the things that he could doubt. So the senses, for example, so we can get information through our senses, we can look at things, we can touch, we can sense, we can hear, but they can deceive us. We could, for example, look at this pencil in a glass of water. To our eyes, it looks like the pencil is bent, right? But in reality, it's not. So he gets rid of the senses as unreliable sources of information, so something we cannot rely on. And then he goes up a step further. You can think you are, for example, you are here sitting, listening to my talk, right beside your colleagues or your friends or someone. But, an evil demon could be deceiving you, or you could be dreaming in reality. So the modern day version of this is the Matrix. You could be plugged into some sort of illusion. So gradually, I won't get into the details of his meditations. It's a very simple book. Read it if you get a chance. He gets rid of all sorts of things that could be slightly doubted. So what he finally arrives is the fact that there is something doing the thinking, right? I think, therefore I am. If I'm doubting, if I'm thinking, there must be an I doing the thinking. I may not be a body, I may not be flesh, but I may exist in a vat, but there is still I am. So from there, he can trust himself. He can conceive of himself as something undoubtable, and from there he can build the unshakable foundations for the philosophy and for the sciences. Sorry, that took too long than I anticipated, because I want to finish on time. So Descartes was one of the most influential, he still remains one of the most influential thinkers in the West, at least. His influence is not only limited to philosophy, but to a lot of the sciences and to computer science. At least that's what I think, and that's what I argue. So the sciences, this is taken from Prigogine and strangers. They are Nobel, they won the Nobel, I think, for chemistry and physics. So they go on to say, traditional science in the age of the machine tends to emphasize stability, order, uniformity, and equilibrium. Whereas most of reality, instead of being orderly, stable, and equilibrial, is seething and bubbling with change, disorder, and process. So the sciences, when we do science, we want to classify, we want to create order, we want to control, we want to manipulate, we want to create a reality that actually is not there, because reality is not orderly and equilibrial. It's continually changing, and when we categorize, we bring our own perceptions into it. And then Foucault also adds to this, so the sciences always carry with themselves the project, however remote it might be, of an exhaustive ordering of the world. Whether you look at chemistry or physics or psychology or neuroscience, it's not to embrace the ambiguous and messy reality and trying to understand it as it is. The constant aspiration, this is a common theme that runs throughout, is to find some sort of order, to classify, to get control, to get hold of things. And with all this classification and categorization also comes, power relations. Classifications are not a simple neutral or objective activities. Those who classify also hold the power to decide who is in, who is out, and what's legitimate and what's not, and so on. So if we also look at the etymology of science from the mid-centuries, the emphasis is certainty, certitude, separation, distinguishing, cutting. So you get the idea that we all love certainty, we all love categorizing, cutting, separating things instead of looking at or embracing the mess that reality is. Again, Prigogine strangers, one of the most highly developed skills in contemporary Western civilization is dissection. The split up problems into their smallest possible components. We are so good at it, so good we often forget to put pieces back together. So it's not that dividing things into smaller components so we understand them is a bad thing. It's just that we don't often go back and put the pieces back together. That's where the problem lies. So, to summarize, in place of this really messy, complex, ambiguous reality, which is continually changing, what we in ancient philosophies, in modern philosophies, in the sciences, in computer science, what we try to do is to fix things, to stabilize them, to draw boundaries, to separate them, to create divisions. And through all this, we think we are doing all this from an objective point of view. Or we assume that our point of view is something that is universal. We forget that there is a person with, backgrounds, with histories, with personal and professional motivations that is actually doing the categorization and the classification. And this is a good quote from Hans von Foerster. Objectivity is a subject's delusion that observing can be done without him. Invoking objectivity is abrogating responsibility, hence its popularity. It's something you have to think about. So is absolute certainty attainable? Even if we can attain it, is it desirable? So I work in an area called embodied cognitive science, which is really a pushback against the traditional Western understanding and conception of cognition, which is very much embedded in this separation, in this individualistic notion of understanding and looking at cognition. So inspired by that, let's look at non-Western approaches to reality, to cognition, to the person. So Ubuntu is actually not part of embodied cognition, but in my work it is. I bring them together. So Ubuntu is nothing to do with the operating system, by the way. It's a Southern African philosophy, more like a principle, a way of life. Hands up if you've heard of the Ubuntu philosophy. I'm very happy to see so many hands. That's good. So the the idea, the principle here stands in stark opposite with Descartes' idea of I think, therefore I am. The only thing he could be sure was his existence himself, as if he exists in an island separated from others. Here, the emphasis is I exist because I exist with other people. I cannot exist by myself without others. I am because we are, and since we are, therefore I am. So my existence is intertwined, inseparable from those people around me. So I am not a person because I arrived at my existence through logical reasoning. I am a person because I can talk to you, because I can interact with you, because I use language, because I exist with others, because I'm interdependent with others. I have written a short essay for Aeon, if you are interested. Read that. A bit of self-promotion. So, again, for many Russian intellectuals, the emphasis is also relations, connectivity, continuity, and intertwinement, as opposed to separation and division and categorization. So for Mikhail Bakhtin, he was a Russian intellectual who lived between 1985 to 1975. For him, the self is never totally autonomous, never fully self-autonomous. It's always relational. It's always, it always exists in interaction with others. Take, for example, a tweet you send. It's never standing by itself, never self-standing. It's either in response to someone or it's in anticipation to something or someone. So even the tweets we send are always in relation to others. A really grim example is research from solitary confinement. So prisoners who are subjected to isolation in solitary confinement gradually lose their sense of self. The longer they stay in solitary confinement, the more they suffer from delusion, they suffer from lack of sense of time, they have problems differentiating between, themselves and others. Sometimes they don't understand whether the thing being hurt is themselves or others. So the idea is, when we are separated from others, we do lose our sense of self. We don't gain it. We don't think ourselves into existence. We exist through our interactions with others. So for Bakhtin, by looking through the screen of the other's souls, I vivify my exterior. So even the most private thoughts we have are really entangled with others. It might be, defining ourselves against others, or it might be imagining others criticizing our work or embracing our work. There is always others. And it's when you look at traditions from, Africa, Southern Africa especially, in the Russian intellectual tradition, even the Hindu and Arabic work, what you find is this theme of aspiration for continuity and relations and connections as opposed to separations and divisions and kind of trying to stabilize and order things. Okay, going back to this relational self. So, for example, I'm here on a stage at a conference talking. I take on some sort of role based on expectations and norms. I talk a certain way. You come and talk to me afterwards, after the talk. The manner I talk will be different. Again, if we go back to my university, when I have a meeting with my supervisor, the norms and expectations are different. When I'm out with my family or friends, again, I'm slightly a different person, and I move through these roles smoothly. And when we stabilize and define the person, we are losing that gradual continuity. Which person, which me are you defining? So, as we strive towards certainty and stability, we try to quantify and measure this, constantly moving, unquantifiable, really context-dependent nature of being, nature of cognition, and nature of reality in general. And as I said at the beginning, it's not just the philosophies and the sciences. The computer sciences play a huge part, a huge role, and increasingly more so in redefining and categorizing and ordering the social world as we know it. So, because these days there is no problem that we don't try to apply technological solutions for. Any problems, social, political, economical problems that arise, we increasingly go for technological solutions. So here's a few examples. This was a recent proposition to bring in technological solutions to the Irish border issue. This was part of the solution for Brexit. You want to catch distracted drivers that could be dangerous for society? No problem. We'll build a technology for that, right? This one is a really weird one for me. So this was a recent app, I think, proposed by some startup. They want to create a technology that will spot shoplifters before they actually commit the crime. This is absurd. I know we went through, the huge tradition of Western philosophy and the non-traditional Western philosophy's understanding of personhood, but still it gives us enough information to realize that the idea of trying to predict whether someone is likely to commit crime or not, trying to develop a tool, is really crazy. So more absurd technologies. Can face classifiers make reliable inferences or criminality? This was a research that came out in 2016, I think, by 2 researchers. So what they wanted to do is to study images of faces and to infer whether those faces, whether the facial characters can tell them whether those people are criminal or not. So for me, this is using technology to go back to the, earlier pseudoscience, phrenology idea of, totally discredited science. But now that we have technology, we forget how it's pseudoscience and unreliable and dangerous it is. Again, people want to develop technology to judge whether someone is a good babysitter or not. Here's a recent one, consent, a blockchain-based sexual consent app. So I know I don't even know where to begin with this. So the idea is I want to give you examples of how these technologies are infiltrating into the social and the economical and the political world. It's never ending. We use technology in banking, in medicine, in prison systems, in recruiting, all with disastrous impacts, mostly disastrous. Because at the end of the day, what we are trying to do is we are trying to quantify what's continually, we are trying to fix what's continually moving. We are trying to quantify what is really unquantifiable. We are trying to remove something out of its context, where in fact, removing it out of its context really loses its very essence. So, on top of trying to quantify the unquantifiable, what we are trying to also do with much of the technological development, at least the ones that are being deployed in the social world, is we focus mostly on punishment. So we have predictive systems that are likely to catch shoplifters before they happen. We have predictive systems that are supposed to measure or score whether someone is likely to reoffend. We have systems. Okay, I'm going to skip this one. So here is another example of taken from Kat. She was trying to renew her passport, and the online system here in the UK would not recognize her face. So it keeps coming up like, looks like your eyes are closed. We can't find the outline of your head. And here again, this one, the Amazon hiring system, I think this was last year, it's discontinued. Hands up if you've heard of that hiring system. Okay, so Amazon was trying to create this machine learning system that is supposed to simplify the hiring system. So they used the last 10 years of people that they have hired as their input, and they wanted, based on that, they wanted a quick solution to see the characteristics of hireable candidates. So what they find out, what they discovered, what the system did was it excluded women's CVs, it excluded CVs that have women included in them. Because over the last 10 years, they have hired mostly men. So being women excludes you, or was a bad reflection on your CV, makes you less desirable. Again, this one, hands up if you've seen it. Okay, so this guy posted on Twitter, I think. So they uploaded their picture, and Google's face recognition algorithm was like gorillas, and they complained, and now Google has solved the problem by not having gorillas in their in their lists of objects. It's okay. Hands up if you've seen this one. Okay, so when this came out in 2006, it was a big scandal. So a recidivism algorithm system that was developed by Compass, that was used for years across the states. The idea was that they would develop this system that will judge whether so it's to judge people that are in prison. So the idea is they will get a score based on the questionnaires they filled and based on other cultural and background information as well. But what they discovered, what the algorithm was doing was, if you are a white person, even though you are likely to reoffend 44% of, it's an estimate, you were seen as, your scores were seen as much lower, whereas if you are, okay, I don't have time, but the idea is the system was blatantly biased against black people. After so much back and forth, because they wouldn't show their system because it's proprietary and intellectual property, all that. After some court back and forth, they gave open access to how it worked and the data they used, and it was discontinued. But there are a lot of systems, especially in the States, in courtrooms, in prison systems that are still used for these purposes. This one is a recent one that came 2 weeks ago. This is another, I'm not surprised if you haven't heard of it. Again, an algorithm that was used in many hospitals, but what they found is it's biased in its judgment against black people again. So there is a whole area, a whole field of dedicated for all this research, algorithmic injustice. You look at self-driving cars, image recognition, search engines, medicine, hiring. The same trend you will find, these systems are biased against some groups. And the recurring theme is the people that are being discriminated and biased against are people of color, minorities, people who don't fit your stereotypical idea of gender or sexuality or disabled people. So when we are developing and deploying these machines in order to simplify the really messy and contextual world, what we are doing is not getting us some deep, fundamental causal relation. What we are really doing is picking up, historical and social biases. And because the machine is involved, we assume what we are doing is objective and neutral. So in the process, we perpetuate the reality because we think the reality is something that we model. So when we try to pick something up, when we try to decontextualize it, we will find that it's attached to everything. And we end up doing more harm than good. And there is absolutely no technology that is without any side effects. Take this very simple sentiment classifier, for example. So I presume in industry as well, but in academia, many researchers use sentiment classifiers to get a simple idea of, if you have a huge data set, you can't go through each of them one by one, right? So you use sentiment classifiers to get a simple classification, get a simple categorization of whether it falls in positive, neutral, or negative. Or a good example, I think in industry would be you have a huge movie review or some product review, and you have thousands of comments, and you would use sentiment classifier to categorize whether the reviews are mostly positive or negative or neutral, right? So even this very simple tool that seems like it can't be, it can't be biased or discriminatory, does end up having biases. It does end up reflecting societal discriminations and biases. So Robin Spear, he used one of the most commonly used data sets for sentiment classification, and he did a weird thing. He wanted to classify, he wanted to see how names are scored, and what he found is, like, my name is Emily, had a much higher positive score compared to my name is Shanika. So even the simple tools we have reflect our social biases. And let's go to Italian food, had a much higher sentiment, positive score compared to let's go get Mexican food. So I have given you so many negative and kind of traveling applications of tech, right? This goes all the way back to at least to the 1972 when Joseph Weizenbaum, one of the founders of computer science, was writing. So I won't read all this, but I'll summarize it. So the idea is some technology would come up, or some tools or some software would come up, and the computer science community would embrace it, would talk about its marvelousness, and would go on and on and on about how it's going to change society. Some even would go further, as society wouldn't progress, wouldn't go further without this computer science or without this methodological tool. And on the other hand, people would come in with criticisms, with reservations, pointing out limitations. We had that since at least 1972, and it's still the case. So that's people like me continually criticizing and pointing out the limitations. But those people are often discarded as, a tiny minor problems. And the problems that these critics would point out, they are often seen as insignificant compared to the progress that the computer scientist or the application is going to make. So, as I said, when we are trying to develop some technological tools or applications for the social and political world, we are, in a sense, really simplifying this ambiguous and messy world. We are trying to stabilize it and pin it down. And we are dealing with moral and ethical questions, but we treat them as technical problems. So when we are doing that, I think we are either very naive or we are intentionally doing harm. As we make models through our, whatever kind of model you make, I make computational models of cognition, for example. Yes, we know all models are wrong, and if you went to Romeo's talk this morning, you would have got that. But when we go further and make models of the social world, or when we make inferences based on the models that we have made, we are, in a sense, doing dangerous things. We are doing harmful things. Our models are not just wrong. Our models are not just useless. They are also, because they are being reapplied, the things we do not stay in the lab. They are necessarily deployed and applied into the social world. So in a sense, we are doing harm. How many minutes do I have? Okay, so I think I've gone through this. Again, I think I've also kind of touched upon this. So we think all this ordering, classification, and kind of simplification of the world is done from an objective point of view. But it's we that are doing the classification. And if you have noticed through all the examples I gave you, all the bias, discrimination, you can notice the trend that it often harms and discriminates certain type of people, usually minorities or people that don't fit our stereotypical image of, a good candidate or a good babysitter or a good face. And I think this is really obvious for much of the academic endeavor or even the tech world itself. A lot of this technology is developed by homogeneous group and by people who are not personally impacted by the problems. So if the problem doesn't personally impact us, it's really difficult for us to see. It's difficult for us to anticipate. So in 2018, one of the two people that developed the Compass recidivism algorithm went to UCLA and presented their algorithm. They went on and on how beautiful, how accurate their predictive system is. And at the end, one of the audience raised her hand up and said, what kind of ethical questions do you anticipate, or what kind of harm do you anticipate? And the guy was like, I don't know, I'm just an engineer. Have you heard of this? Have you seen this on the news? One person, not bad, okay. But we are not just engineers. You are not just engineers. Whether it's advertising or whether it's building predictive systems, your work is being deployed in the social sphere. So you are dealing with ethical and moral questions. It's not just an engineering. And this idea of absolute certainty gives us the kind of, the excuse to hide behind objectivity. So in a sense, we are not just, when we are making models and when we are making predictive inferences, and when those tools are being deployed in society, we are not just creating tools. In a sense, we are creating reality. We are, by defining the perfect face or the perfect job candidate, we are, in a sense, influencing people, influencing realities, influencing jobs, influencing the social sphere in general. Because through our tools, some people are excluded while others get through. So what do we do? So as engineers, or I don't know, relate to it as whatever we do, first we have to ask, are the tools we are building going to end up doing more good, more harm than any good? I think that's the first principle. Because some technologies should not exist in the first place at all. And I'll mention a few. So this one, using machine learning to predict sexual orientation. Why? Why do we want to do that? Yeah. And another one here by Intake Lab, I think. I think they are an Israeli group. They are advertising this system that is going to predict, that's supposed to predict a person's ethnicity. What is the point? You want to go back? And then you'll tell me I have run out of time. So again, this one, I think in 2007, when it came out by Michael Klonowski and his colleague. Hands up if you've seen this research. Okay, so the idea is they gathered thousands of profile pictures from a dating site, and their claim is they have built this machine learning algorithm that will predict someone's sexuality, whether they are gay or not. And why do you want to do that? What is the point? Tools like this, actually, first of all, it's bullshit. What you are predicting is maybe, makeup or facial configuration, or, picking up, stereotypical images. But having said that, even if it works, why do we want to do that? In places like Ethiopia, for example, where I'm from, being gay could land you in jail. It's illegal. So people could naively pick these tools up and apply them, and putting vulnerable people in a much dangerous place. Okay. So what we see is more harm than any good. And certainty lends itself for this. And another point I want to point out is the idea of certainty really stands in opposite to spontaneity and creativity. So as we strive for order and stability and predictivity, we are limiting the opportunity to be different. We are limiting the opportunity to be spontaneous and creative. So certainty is it not possible? It's also an enemy of creativity and spontaneity. So I have said so much about how messy reality is and how absolute uncertainty is unachievable, and how it blinds us from if we think we are certain, we are unlikely to ask further questions. We are unlikely to doubt ourselves. We are unlikely to see whether the machine learning system we are building, how that will impact people, whether it will end up discriminating and putting some people out of job. So this is my final point. I've made it on time almost. So here is my take-home message. So I've said so many negative things, and I've told you how impossible uncertainty is. So what do we do? What are the messages I want you to go home with? So first of all, the things we are dealing with, the tools we are building, the questions we are asking are not just technical. They don't stay within the environment or the lab or the office. Whether by you or by other people or by third parties, they will get picked up and they will have real impact on other people. So they are necessarily ethical and moral questions. And so there are so many questions, right? But what's the answer? It's not about the answer, and there is no one right answer. It's about asking meaningful questions. And much of the machine learning systems that are being developed are really all about predicting, all about anticipating and inferring when we have no understanding. So my message is we should aspire more to understand and less to predict. And in place of final fixed answer, yeah, we can have answers. We should have answers, but we should always leave room. We should always we should always be a little open so we can reiterate, so we can change when different evidence shows up, so we can incorporate that, so we can accommodate change. So I say, embrace uncertainty, embrace indeterminability, and embrace partial openness and unfinalizability. Thank you.